back to African Voices TV. Yes, you're with me, Chiwa Chihana and Bailo Jalo.
Yes, you are explaining about in terms of the rules in regarding to the routine redocumentation. So looking at what you've just mentioned, that talking about consent, because what you are trying to explain is like you did not give consent for the Home Office to give kind of like that thick file to the Zimbabwean officials. But do you agree with the Home Office that this is something that they are allowed to do or that they have to do?
Well, they're at liberty to, I'm sure I must have signed some consent to say that they are free to share this information with other organizations or interested parties and what have you.
Because that's their argument.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, but from my own perspective, I'm a person who's vehemently opposed to the government of Zimbabwe. I don't like it. I don't like the sitting president. I don't like Mnangagwa. He's a disgrace to Zimbabwe. So that exposes me.
And you're very vocal about it, and you're highly at risk, and that's a fact.
Yes.
So for you, basically, you are saying probably they are legally right, but morally they're not right.
Well, it's not about, it's about my human rights, because I know that if I go back to Zimbabwe there, I'm going to meet out with inhuman treatment, detention, torture, and possibly death, because that is happening. I've got a nephew of mine who's been tortured. He's a very, very outspoken member of the MDC. I forget how many times he has been, they've raided his houses and tortured him. There was one instance when he was interviewed by Andrew Harding on Sky News. He was literally weeping after having been released from prison. So they would do the same treatment to me. That's one point. And the second point was, I was very, very active in opposition to the Mnangagwa government when it took over. We've got to understand the situation that happened after Mugabe, the late Mugabe, was overthrown by the army, which supported Mnangagwa. Robert Mugabe, when refused asylum seekers who left Zimbabwe, could not get status in the countries that they went. Robert Mugabe's policy was, I don't want them back, right? What Mnangagwa did was, he wants them back. Going back to these financial incentives, because it was part of a plan for him to get financial incentives from the United Kingdom. This is why he said, let me get them back, so that he would look favorable to his government.
Right.
And to add more to what Stuart had said, in February 2018, I read an article in the Financial Times where the business editor, the business reporter, went to Zimbabwe to interview Mnangagwa. And after the interview, the last comment in that report was that they should give the benefit of the doubt to Mnangagwa's government, who had just taken over from Robert Mugabe, which means there were plans afoot to accept him into the international fold as a new person who had taken over from Mugabe. When I left Zimbabwe, I was in opposition to Mugabe, and both of them are still ZANU-PF, both Mugabe and Mnangagwa. So those plans were put in order to incentivize Mnangagwa and accept him into the international fold, thinking that he would be a much better person than Mnangagwa. A situation that is proved otherwise, because he's actually worse than Mugabe. And even the MDC opposition party leader, Nelson Chamisa, has actually said this guy is ruthless, he's worse than. And Mnangagwa has always been known as the hatchet person from Mugabe. He used to do all the dirty tricks. He held the defense portfolio, the intelligence services, and Minister of various portfolios that he has held, and during those times he was the person whom Mugabe tasked to do all the dirty work for him, and now he's got free reign to do that post Mugabe.
So before we come back to the current campaign, Stuart, how successful was that campaign? Because I can remember there were so many protest demonstrations and that kind of thing, which after your explanation we'll be able to look at that in details.
Well, the fact that Victor's here now is testimony to part of the success of it. We think it was the biggest ever mobilisation of people on a cold Tuesday morning as well, in favour of asylum rights. And I think part of that was because people know and love people like Victor and Marion. So there was a personal element, and that's fine, isn't it? Because these things are happening to real people in our community, our friends. So it was successful in getting Victor and a number of other people released from Morton Hall immigration detention near Lincoln. It was also successful, I think, in warning the Home Office. The last thing the Home Office wants is accountability, for people to be watching what they do and asking questions like we're doing now about it. And the fact there were 200 people there and 77,000 people signed the petition for Victor in a couple of weeks, and there was massive coverage. You will see our member Marion interviewed on Channel 4 News. That wasn't an easy thing for her to do, but she did that. A lot of people stepped up and went public about what was happening to them and to other people. So in that sense, it was successful. But the fact that we're talking about this now, and the fact that Simba went through what he's been through and is still going through, means it obviously wasn't a complete success.
No.
What we're doing goes on.
And also just to highlight that Simba's is not an isolated case, and it will spearhead quite a lot of other cases around. For example, last year in 20 doctors who returned their medals for their role in fighting Ebola in the Congo. They were awarded here, but they returned those medals on account of the fact that they were the policy of them having to police people's immigration status instead of treating them made them they felt they were being alienated from their patients. And so we've come to this point where now medical personnel are saying we can't do this, we shouldn't be policing people, we shouldn't be passport control. We're looking at this, we're talking about organizations, charities, and I think this is where you're coming in and saying enough is enough with this particular campaign. Am I right?
Yeah, you mentioned the doctors, that's true, and many other organisations, the British Medical Association, a number of trade unions as well have said that this policy, as I said before, is not only inhumane, but it doesn't work. It doesn't stop people coming here, it doesn't stop people getting ill or seeking treatment. So it doesn't work, the policy. It's part of a deliberate attempt to deter people from becoming part of society, becoming part of society that people are told to integrate into, and yet they're excluded. And it damages, as you say, the people who are forced to be border guards, the people who are GP receptionists, the people who work in banks, the people who work in the DVLA, people who work in higher education, registering
landlords
students.
As well.
Landlords, exactly. So it corrupts all of us, actually. And not just the people who are subject to the worst end of it, are being denied access to things that a lot of us take for granted, but for the people who are forced to be border guards with regard to their friends and their neighbours. And let's think about this. I mean, when people don't know what the regulations are, excuse me, and they are pretty unclear, I think deliberately so, then people are going to err on the side of caution. They're scared about being reprimanded by their manager or their boss or being taken to court. So people are going to err on the side of caution if they think somebody might not have the legal right to be treated. And on what grounds do you think they're going to do that? Maybe how they sound, what they look like, and what does that tell us about our society, and what does that make us into if we do that?
Talking of that though, Sheffield is kind of like looked at as the city of sanctuary, or as, which nobody can deny that. But do you think policies like this are now kind of making people to think, oh, what's happening, in terms of like people living together, in terms of integration and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it does. It contradicts what Sheffield was. I mean, Sheffield was the first city of sanctuary. It contradicts the mission that we set ourselves to welcome people. How can we welcome people if those people are excluded from vital services? We can't. And I think a city sanctuary has to think very carefully about how it reacts to this. I think it should, where it can, it should defy this legislation and try and change this legislation, because you can't be a welcoming place when you deny basic services to the people you say you're welcoming.
So let's talk about the current campaign that's going on now. That is the Simba campaign. So what are you kind of like looking for?
Well, Simba wants justice. First of all, he wants the fees written off. It's impossible for somebody with no income. Don't forget, the Home Office have cut off income to Simba, and another arm of the government has charged him £100,000 plus. So it's obviously impossible for him to pay that. And I think Simba can speak for himself, but I think Simba wants justice not just for himself, but for other people. He recognises that other people, if it isn't changed, will be going through a similar thing in the future. So Simba's campaign is for justice for Simba, but also other people who need access to basic services.
And also to highlight the fact that this policy of denying treatment to people who are then treated as an emergency, the policy itself is false economy, because if, like in the case of Simba, he was consistently denied treatment, even at the primary stage of treatment. And that caused his situation to go worse, because he's always had an underlying health problem where he's not exactly hemophiliac, but his blood doesn't clot very easily. When his gums start bleeding, or when he's got nose bleeding, even when he was young, his blood would take much longer to clot. And this is exactly what happened when he had this brain hemorrhage. So if they'd arrested the situation at an earlier stage, he wouldn't have had the £100,000 bill.
No.
It would have been arrested at a very, very, very early stage, and the cost would have been minimal, really, so to speak. But they deny him at a primary stage of health care, and then treat him as an emergency at a very, very high cost. Where is the cost benefit? I mean, if you look at the cost benefit analysis, it's false economy.
Absolutely.
What are they doing there? But I can see their logic. Their logic is about deterrence, so that the word goes around. Like what Theresa May to say, we want to make it as hostile as possible. If other people see that this is what the system is going to do, then people will think twice about coming to the United Kingdom. It's not about money, it's about deterrence.
In very plain terms, we're saying we're giving death sentences to people who cannot afford to. This is what it is. That's how it reads to me as you explain it there. It's you die or you leave.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's how it's looking. Yeah. So in terms of where you are at with the campaign, so congratulations on launching it today. Who have you got around you? We're running up to the election, so I'm going to try and assume that you've had some support from politicians coming on board or not. How is that looking?
Well, part of the event tomorrow, as you know, we're in a pre-election period, in case you didn't notice.
Yeah, can I just interrupt there? In terms of, as you will know, it's election period. Yeah. So because we've got various parties, I'll tell them for us not to talk about political parties and that kind of thing, because as you will know,
we have an embargo.
Kind of, embargo going on. Yeah. So let's just focus on the campaign. How can people get involved?
Okay, well, everybody who got involved in the campaign against what the Home Office were doing to Zimbabwean people in Sheffield, and there are hundreds and thousands of those in Sheffield alone, should get involved in this campaign. This campaign flows from that. It's not, I can't be certain and say that Simba's health problems are caused by the stress he was put under, but for sure they didn't help. So follow through on your support for those people, I'd say. To all the people in Sheffield and beyond who are watching this and who work in the health service or education or in a bank and are told, well, maybe you shouldn't allow this person to have a bank account, shouldn't allow this person to get treatment, talk to your trade union. Your trade union will probably have a good policy, actually, on paper, saying that a hostile environment shouldn't be there. Talk to your union, talk to your manager and your workmates about how you can not do things that are unjust and that, as we say, impact on not just the people who are denied treatment, but the people forced to be border guards. So a lot of us are in that situation, and we should think carefully about how we get around this. Like I say, particularly in Sheffield, we can't be a city of sanctuary while we deny people basic services. It's another border. It's an internal border. It's not a fence or a razor wire. It's an invisible border that stops you being part of the society that you want to be part of.
Yeah.
Looking at Victor here, in terms of what he's been involved in, his kind of cases has been very popular. It's been covered by the media. There has been lots of campaigns surrounding him and his son and that kind of thing. Do you think these are just kind of isolated cases, or these are cases where so many other people are kind of suffering out there as well, but we don't tend to know about them because nobody knows about it?
They're absolutely not isolated cases. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but more importantly, there's government evidence, which has not been released to Parliament, actually. And we think we know why, having seen some of the key information in there. So part of that pilot study on NHS charging was to look at 8,990 cases of people who they thought weren't eligible for healthcare. 50 people out of getting up to 10,000, 5%, less than 5%, were shown not to be eligible. Now, the full results of that pilot study from the government has not been released to Parliament. Why? What are they hiding? If their policy is working, in their terms, why not tell us that? It's not, it's been hidden. And we know from the range of organisations, like I say, not just refugee organisations and those that support them, but medical organisations, organisations who work in higher education, Unis Not Borders, another one, Docs Not Cops in the health service, are all saying this doesn't work in its own, even in its own terms. It's wrong, but even in its own terms, it's not working. So it must be about something else. And I do think, and I'm not going to miss this opportunity to say, that I think the real politics behind this isn't about health tourism. You're talking about, the government's figures talk about 0.3% of people, including British expats, by the way, who pop back here for treatment, who are health tourists. It's not about that at all. It's about undermining something that's central to British politics for my generation and those to come, and that is universal access to healthcare. And that's why it's in the name of solidarity that people who aren't refugees and migrants and are trade unions, for example, should get involved in this campaign. Because next it will be you. What next? I mean, what, you smoke so you don't deserve health treatment? You're obese so you don't, whatever. So this to me is undermining a basic principle of society, of British society, that we're proud of and we're right to be proud of.
I have to say, in addition to what you've just said, one of the cases that was quite prominent last year was that of a Windrush, a man from the Windrush generation who had lived in the United Kingdom for 44 years and had prostate cancer, and the government had he incurred a bill of £54,000 thereabouts. And again, this is somebody who'd been in the country for 44 years. This is all he had known, and it was medical people that came around him that actually campaigned against that. So we're talking about a bill of almost 100,000 in your case, and going up. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Definitely. But what has been the Home Office response to this in terms of, are they aware that Simba has been sent this bill?
Well, they must be aware, because the business side of the NHS is responding to the regulations as set by the Home Office. So there's no reason why they shouldn't know
but
about
if I understand you, even the NHS knows that this money is not going to be paid, don't they? Like, they know for a fact that the money will not be paid. And the Home Office as well knows that that money is just a figure that they will keep on writing, but it's never ever going to be paid.
This is financial massaging, really, because who's going, even if you were to get leave to remain and start working, where is he going to start from to say, they've actually asked him to do a payment plan, which for which is responded by putting a figure of 50 pence.
Right.
So even if he were to live 9 lifetimes like a cat, he's never going to pay that at 50 pence a month or a week and whatever. And they've accepted it because that's what the system requires him to do, 50 pence a month.
So just a quick one, because we don't have much time. What would be your message today to anyone that would be watching this show?
Well, my situation and my son's situation are not, these situations are not isolated. The fortunate part of our situation is that it's being highlighted and the focus is on us. It's not a good situation to be. There are times when I joke about it, but it's just for relief, really. But deep down, I'm hurting, and so are members of my family. It's a very, very difficult situation to deal with. There's so many stresses, there's so many pressures and what have you. The only comfort I derive from this is that my family and I are being made to, are being put in the spotlight in order to highlight problems that are happening widely among asylum seekers and refugees. That's the only comfort I'm getting. Otherwise, it's not an easy situation. It's a very, very painful situation, especially when I've been in the asylum system for the best part of 11 years. Mine is not a very long situation. I've known asylum seekers who've been in the system for 20 years. They haven't got settlement as well. But if I'm using my situation to highlight those people whose situations are never, ever spoken or talked about, then I think I'm doing a good job, and my family are doing a good job.
And hopefully we can influence, you can influence policy with the actions.
That's the only comfort I get from that. Otherwise, it's not a situation that I would wish on anybody, because it's inhuman.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So if you're looking to support, the campaign is called Justice for Simba, Ending the Hostile Environment. The campaign has launched tonight, and if you go on social media and other places on the internet, you will be able to find this. Thanks for joining us tonight, Bailo.
Well, unfortunately, it's a topic that's very, very difficult to talk about, but we appreciate your presence here. Thank you very much for coming. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for tonight. Until next week, from me and the rest of us here, have a good night.
Good night.